When it comes to weapons, war is unsurprisingly the mother of invention. The need to gain an upper hand has led to plenty of advances in combat over the centuries, and some of them have been rather strange. Here are some of the most bizarre weapons ever used by soldiers in war. By the early 20th century, chainmail's heyday had long passed. This archaic armor was no match for machine guns, tanks, and bombs, but it nevertheless found its unexpected last hurrah in the trenches among British tank crews. During World War I, tanks rolled through enemy lines and cleared out areas for infantry advances. Their heavy exterior armor protected them and made them difficult to destroy, but they weren't invulnerable. Drivers still faced the repeated impact of machine gun fire, shells, and grenades in their poorly ventilated compartments. As shells and bullets repeatedly pounded tank exteriors, crews suffered flurries of hot metal shrapnel that could burn their faces. So the British improvised a special mask to protect their tank crews. This mask protected the eyes and left slits for visibility, and the lower half of the mask was chainmail. It was meant to capture shrapnel in its rings and protect the mouth and chin of the tank crewmen. That sounds ingenious, although it's unclear how well it actually worked. The lasso is a simple piece of rope with a loop at the end that conjures nostalgic images of the Old West. Back in the ancient world, it doubled as a cheap and deadly weapon. On the Eurasian steppe, metal was scarce. The nomadic inhabitants relied on armor and weapons made from a mix of wood, hide, and horn. Metal weapons were more frequently found among the aristocracies of steppe societies, so common warriors had to make do with weapons like bows. Others preferred the lasso. According to the Greek travel writer Pausanias, the Iranian Sarmatians were masters with the lasso. A favorite tactic of these master riders was to charge an opponent and lasso him off his horse. The Sarmatian warrior would then drag his opponent back to his lines, assuming he survived the initial fall. Lassos appear throughout the Iranian-speaking steppe world and were immortalized in the Iranian epic poem The Shahnameh, in which legendary warrior Rostam defeats his opponent by lassoing him and pulling him off his horse. Although medieval warfare was plenty bloody, the goal wasn't always to kill enemies. When it came to higher-ranking foes, it was sometimes lucrative to capture them instead. But capturing an enemy wasn't always easy. To solve this problem, someone devised a terrifying-looking weapon called the man-catcher. This device consisted of a metal pole with a claw of sorts at its end. The tips were spiked, allowing it to dig into an armored enemy enough to immobilize him but not excessively harm him. If used correctly, the wielder could snatch a foe off his horse and drag him back for ransom, assuming he survived. Although the man-catcher disappeared from the battlefields as gunpowder took over, evidence suggests that law enforcement kept using it in Europe to capture criminals without killing them. Versions of it are still used today in some countries for riot control and non-lethal restraint. In 1544, English King Henry VIII received an offer from an Italian man named Giovanni Battista di Ravenna, who proposed that Henry arm his gunners with gun shields. The idea behind this strange weapon made sense, but its execution was lacking. Henry gave permission to have his bodyguard experiment with the weapon before trying it out on the battlefield. The idea was to place a shield with a hole in it through which a firearm could be inserted. The gunner would thereby be protected from enemy fire while still being able to see and shoot his enemies through a grill in the shield at eye level. Although Battista's idea was theoretically well thought out, there was one major problem, as the shield was too heavy and made it impossible for the gunner to fire his weapon.
Oh, this is heavy.
The only way to fire the gun was to place the shield on a stand or some other support. Thus, it was easier to fire the gun unprotected without the shield. The idea was abandoned for infantrymen, although it was possibly repurposed for ships, where gunners could use the deck for support. During the 15th century, a firebrand preacher named Jan Hus spoke out against the Roman Catholic Church. After his execution for heresy in 1415, his followers, known as Hussites, spread throughout the modern Czech Republic. In 1419, they rose in revolt against the Holy Roman Empire. From 1419 to 1436, Crusaders and Hussites fought across Bohemia. Although the Hussites were outnumbered and under-equipped, they devised an ingenious wagon-based weapon to negate the imperial army's most powerful arm, its knights. Wagons had been used in war since ancient times. So while the Hussite use of wagons wasn't new, their bizarre-looking modifications made them virtually impregnable. Under Jan Žižka, the old commander of the Bohemian Royal Guard, the Hussites developed the Wagenberg. Žižka reinforced the wagons with wood panels on all sides, and each wagon became a mobile fort filled with gunners, slingers, crossbowmen, and pikemen. The Hussite wagon fort was devastatingly effective, and it defeated 5 Crusader armies. This tactic was so successful that it spread to Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and eventually all the way to India. Eventually, though, heavier, more powerful field artillery would negate the advantage of the war wagon. But during its time, this simple yet ingenious weapon ruled the battlefields of Eastern Europe. A dead man cannot fight, but during the Middle Ages, deceased soldiers sometimes proved more useful than living ones. During this time, it was generally understood that plague could spread from person to person, even if the causes weren't fully yet understood. In 1346, the inhabitants of the Genoese city of Kaffa discovered to their horror how an infected man could fight even in death.
Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!
At the time, Kaffa was a bustling merchant city, though its Catholic majority often clashed with its Muslim neighbors, who were subject to the Mongol Golden Horde. After one dispute led to violence, the Golden Horde laid siege to the city in 1346. With naval dominance in the Black Sea, Genoa could reinforce and resupply the city by sea. Meanwhile, the Black Death had spread via the Silk Road into southern Russia. The pestilence stuck the besiegers, killing many and forcing them to abandon the siege. Before leaving, the furious Mongol commander sent the defenders one last grisly souvenir. As the Tatars dismantled the siege lines, they loaded dead bodies of their own men onto catapults and flung them over the walls. Many of Kaffa's inhabitants fled the city hoping to escape the plague, but in doing so, they inadvertently brought it first to Constantinople and Anatolia, and then eventually to Italy. This unconventional warfare on the Mongols' part accelerated the spread of the plague, which ravaged Kaffa and killed over a quarter of Europe's population, a fitting revenge. Following the conquest of eastern Poland in 1939, the Soviet Union attacked Finland. The Finnish army fought back in a brutal conflict called the Winter War, as a country of 4 million people attempted to preserve its liberty against communism. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the Finns would not be easily bowed. The Finns' main problem was their lack of anti-tank guns. To compensate, they transformed crude Spanish petrol bombs into a sort of sticky grenade dubbed the Finnish Molotov cocktail. Because petrol bombs often endangered the thrower as well as the target, the Finnish army completely revamped the weapon. The bottle was filled with a mix of tar, kerosene, and potassium chlorate, making for a sticky, highly flammable mixture. The bottle was then sealed tightly to prevent leakage. Ingeniously, they were lit with 2 matches on the sides. A soldier could safely light the matches and throw the bottle, ensuring that if it broke, it would light up its target.
Fire! 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 Fire!
The Finnish Molotov cocktail proved effective against Soviet tanks. It could ignite the tank and smoke out the crew, whom Finnish riflemen could then pick off at leisure. A bottle in the hatch would burn the crew alive, while a bottle to the treads would immobilize the tank. The tar ensured that the liquid stuck to clothes and skin, making an encounter with a Finnish Molotov cocktail a guaranteed death sentence for Soviet tank crews. In 1942, Germans pioneered moderately successful remote-controlled mini-tanks to fend off Allied tanks and blast through enemy fortifications. This mini-tank was called the Goliath, a misnomer considering that it was small enough to slip underneath a full-size tank while carrying up to 220 pounds of ordnance. This made it useful not just against enemy tanks, but also against pillboxes, gun emplacements, and other field fortifications. The Goliath was the latest in a string of experiments involving remote-controlled explosive delivery systems. It was controlled with a joystick that was hooked to the Goliath with an unwinding cable. This made the Goliath useless if the cable was cut. However, the amount of explosives made it extremely potent if it reached its intended target, and Goliaths were used to devastating effect during the Warsaw Uprising in World War II. Although the Goliath's problems led to its eventual abandonment, its principal contribution was in the field of robotics. British, Israeli, and American scientists all built on the principles behind the Goliath, as it created remote-controlled mine-clearing and bomb-disposing vehicles. While attempting to neutralize Germany's legendary Panzer Corps during World War II, the Soviets tried a highly unorthodox solution. It turned out to be a miserable failure and would today be considered animal abuse, but during Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet commanders created kamikaze dogs. They strapped the animals with roughly 26 pounds of TNT inside 2 pouches carried on their sides. They were trained to crawl underneath German panzers. Once they reached the underside of their targets, a spring mechanism would pull the pin on the explosives and detonate both the tank and the dog. The Soviets encountered a major problem with this weapon in addition to the animal cruelty. Often, the dogs simply refused to run toward the Germans, or worse, they would run toward their own lines and create havoc among the Soviet vehicles. Since the German tanks smelled unfamiliar due to their gas engines, the dogs were more comfortable near the more familiar Soviet diesel-powered tanks that they were trained with. This program was shelved after 1 year, but the use of animals to ferry explosives did not die. As recently as 2014, Israeli forces shot a suicide donkey bomber near a border crossing. Russia's defeat in the Crimean War exposed the country's technological backwardness, prompting Tsar Alexander III to begin modernizing the Navy. With the advent of ironclad monitors in the United States and Europe, Russia risked falling behind its global rivals. In response, they experimented with a new design, a circular ship. At the time, a Scottish engineer named John Elder had been delving into creating floating fortresses. Following Elder's lead, Russian sailor and engineer Andrei Popov decided to make the circular ship a reality. Popov and Elder noted that a circular ship would displace more water and allow a greater number of guns to be deployed on the vessel's deck. As an added advantage, much of the hull would be underwater, making it difficult to hit from the deck of another ship. So in 1873, the Russian Navy put the Novgorod to sea. Unfortunately for Popov, the Novgorod had been approved without testing. Because the ship was so oddly shaped, the rudder and propellers were too small to move it, and the vessel was unstable when unmoored even in calm waters. Ultimately, the Novgorod was only utilized briefly during the Russo-Turkish War in 1877. It was assigned to coastal defense afterward and eventually scuppered in 1903 as dreadnoughts and other steel steamers came to rule the seas. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.